This man is named Brown. He is an archaeologist or a researcher of ancient historical objects. That afternoon, Brown was traveling by boat to a rural island in England. Upon arriving, he immediately rode a bicycle to visit the house of a respected woman named Mrs. Pretty, then negotiated about a job. Mrs. Pretty is a wealthy widow with one child. Her husband, a military general, died during World War I. Mrs. Pretty called Brown to ask for help excavating the mysterious mounds on her land, which she believed contained historical artifacts. After examining the condition of the land, Brown was convinced that a historical relic was buried there, likely from the Viking civilization. When they discussed it again at the house, Brown asked Mrs. Pretty to hire 2 people to help him dig so the work could be completed more quickly. In the middle of the conversation, Mrs. Pretty's son, Robert, arrived. Robert, who also liked archaeology, quickly became close with Brown. The next day, the excavation project began.
Pretty's mountains, well enough.
Day after day, Brown and the 2 diggers kept working on the mound until he finally found a piece of decayed wood. Not long after, 2 officials sent from the city museum arrived. They were both shocked to see Brown's discovery, but when one of them tried to lift it, the piece of wood crumbled. Frustrated, Brown left to calm himself. At the house, Mrs. Pretty was hosting the 2 museum officials. When Brown arrived, he told her that his previous analysis had been wrong. Based on the level of decay of the wood, he was certain it was much older than the Viking civilization, specifically from the Anglo-Saxon period. Hearing this, the 2 officials laughed and said it was impossible. No archaeologist in England had ever found artifacts from before the Viking era. Instead of digging here without certainty, they suggested it would be better for Brown to help with another excavation project that was far more important. However, not wanting to disappoint Mrs. Pretty, Brown refused the offer. The next day, as she did every month, Mrs. Pretty visited her husband's grave. But after returning, she appeared to be holding her chest in pain. Soon after, a doctor came to examine her. After the checkup, the doctor gave her a list of medications and advised her not to think too much. The following day, Mrs. Pretty inspected the excavation site. Because the ground was unstable, Brown told her not to get too close, but while he was explaining his latest analysis, suddenly the ground collapsed and buried Brown alive. Everyone panicked and tried to dig him out with their bare hands. Thankfully, Brown survived. For days, Brown and his 2 assistants continued the excavation. One day while working, Robert came to play. During their conversation, British fighter planes suddenly flew overhead. It was the years leading up to World War II. Soldiers in various countries were busy preparing for war. Robert said that when he grew up, he did not want to become a soldier like his father. Instead, he wanted to be an astronaut so he could travel among the stars. Then Brown told him that he often observed the stars through a telescope. If Robert wanted, he would bring his telescope there. Hearing this made him very happy, and he asked Brown to keep his promise. 3 days later, Brown invited Mrs. Pretty and Robert to the excavation site. There, Mrs. Pretty was shocked to learn that her assumption was correct. On her land, there truly was a historical artifact in the shape of a ship. They were all moved and overjoyed, congratulating each other on this great discovery. That afternoon, after a full day of digging, Mrs. Pretty's servant informed Brown that a guest was waiting for him in his room. During his stay, Mrs. Pretty had provided him with a room in the servants' quarters. When he entered, the guest turned out to be his wife, May. She had come only to check on him since there had been no news from him for weeks. They spent time walking around the grounds of Mrs. Pretty's house. That night, May said goodbye and went home.
Let me help.
Right.
In the middle of heavy rain, Brown almost slipped. Fortunately, Mrs. Pretty's cousin, Rory, arrived just in time. After covering the ship while taking shelter, Rory introduced himself and explained that he had come at Mrs. Pretty's request to help document the excavation by taking photographs. The next morning, Mrs. Pretty was seen going to a hospital in London. After undergoing an examination, the doctor explained her heart condition was getting worse. It turned out that she had been suffering from chronic heart disease. The doctor even stated that she did not have long to live. That afternoon, at the excavation site, officials from the National Museum arrived to see Brown's discovery. Everyone was amazed, except for one archaeologist representing the museum named Phillips. He said that Brown's job was done. On behalf of the state, he would now take over the excavation project. Seeing such arrogance, Brown could only mutter a prayer under his breath. When he tried to confirm this with Mrs. Pretty, the servant refused to let him in because she could not be disturbed. Instead of leaving, he entered through a side door. When they met, he asked what the officials had said that made her suddenly hand over the project to the state when she had originally wanted to complete it herself. However, due to her weakened condition, Mrs. Pretty instructed the servant to escort Brown out.
The next day, now that Phillips was in charge, he said that if Brown still wanted to work, he could help with the digging, but he was no longer allowed to touch the ship. Feeling offended, Brown chose to quit. On his way home, he met Robert. When Robert asked where he was going, Brown sadly replied that he was going home and would not return. Robert quickly grabbed his bicycle and chased after him. Upon arriving home, Brown explained to his wife why he had quit. He felt that even if he continued working, his name would never be credited as the discoverer of the ship. While Brown was outside trying to calm himself, May approached him and reminded him of something he used to say: "An archaeologist does not serve to be known by many people, but so that people in the future can understand and learn how their ancestors lived." Hearing this, Brown fell silent. In the middle of their conversation, Brown was surprised to see Robert had followed him all the way across the island by bicycle. Robert came to remind him of his promise to look at the stars together through his telescope. Brown then told the boy to come inside first. Not long after, Mrs. Pretty arrived to pick up Robert after reading a letter from Brown. Not only to pick him up, she also asked Brown to return to work the next day. Having been advised by his wife earlier, Brown agreed. The next morning, Brown returned to work. 2 young archaeologists also arrived to help. Unlike before, Mrs. Pretty was now more actively supervising the project. That night, Brown kept his promise and showed the stars through his telescope. Robert was so happy that he invited his mother to join him in admiring the stars. A few days later, while everyone was busy digging, one of the workers discovered a hidden treasure from the ship.
Look. Look at this.
Brown's analysis was correct. The ship dated back to the Anglo-Saxon era. Phillips was shocked. They had just learned that even during the so-called Dark Ages, there had been a civilization with culture and even a system of money for trade. Phillips believed that this discovery would greatly change how modern humanity viewed the past. After a full day of collecting the artifacts, he ordered the workers to load them into a car to be taken to the museum. However, Mrs. Pretty refused because all the items were found on her land. Until an official court decision was made, Phillips was only the project leader, and Brown was still considered the discoverer. Mrs. Pretty had the right to decide where the artifacts would be kept. She then instructed Brown to bring all the discovered treasures to her house. The next day, while they were continuing the excavation, a British fighter plane suddenly crashed. Rory rushed to help, but the pilot could not be saved. Rory was deeply shaken. That night at the house, Mrs. Pretty's illness suddenly relapsed. One of the female workers quickly took her to her room. Despite being in great pain, she refused to call a doctor. Robert, who accidentally saw and heard his mother's groans, immediately ran away. Outside, he bumped into Brown. His emotions were all over the place. While crying, he blamed himself, feeling that he had failed. Since his father's death, as the only son, everyone seemed to expect him to take care of his mother. Robert then told Brown about his mother's heart condition, which he had overheard a few days earlier when the doctor visited. He also knew that she did not have much time left. Brown was shocked. Although he wanted to help, there was nothing he could do. He was just an outsider who should not interfere in another family's affairs. All he could do was comfort Robert and tell him to go back to sleep. At a bar, while Phillips and the workers were enjoying the night, the music on the radio changed to breaking news. It reported that Nazi Germany had begun bombing Poland. The next morning, Rory said goodbye to Mrs. Pretty. When she asked where he was going, he replied that he had been selected for military service and would go to war. Hearing this, Mrs. Pretty was shocked. She asked Rory to promise to return safely because he might be the only family Robert would have left if she passed away. The next day, based on the court's decision, the judge declared that the ship and its remains fully belonged to Mrs. Pretty. In the car, instead of feeling happy, Mrs. Pretty cried. She mourned the fact that her time was running out. She then asked Brown what the beliefs of the Anglo-Saxons might have been and where their souls went after death. Brown replied that the Anglo-Saxons were people who sailed from the ends of the earth, crossing the seas throughout their lives. Perhaps they believed in sailing all the way to the stars. If they could not reach them in life, then maybe in death their souls would travel to the stars. At the house, to celebrate the great discovery, Mrs. Pretty invited people of all walks of life, especially the families of the workers. In her speech, she announced in front of all the guests, including journalists, that Brown was the first to discover the ship. Brown was deeply touched. His hard work had been recognized. After the event, Mrs. Pretty invited Brown to the ship's site. There, she said that she would donate the treasures found from the ship to the National Museum so that more people could see them. Brown had no objection. He then said that since a world war was about to begin, Germany would likely bomb England, and to prevent destruction, it would be better to bury the ship again until the war ended. That night, before it was buried, Rory invited his mother to the ship to imagine together. Robert became the captain who would take his queen sailing towards the stars. Even though he knew his mother did not have much time left, he tried not to cry. From behind, Brown watched over them. That night, under the vast sky, Robert and his mother spent time together as if it were their last night.